Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Council Executive Meeting. Hopefully everyone has seen the agenda. We've got quite a lot of agenda items tonight, but just to welcome everybody taking part in the meeting, and those on the committee, public participants, and also those watching along at home. You're all very welcome. The first agenda item that we have is declarations of interest. So I'd like to ask any members to declare any interest that they would like to. Councillor Smalley.
Thank you, Chair. Just to declare a prejudicial interest in the item concerning Make It York. As a director of Make It York, I have a prejudicial interest and I will be out of the meeting at that point.
Thank you very much. And also Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in the same way, I'd like to declare a prejudicial interest in agenda item 9 as a director of Make It York, and I also won't participate or vote on that item.
Thank you very much. I can't see any other hands, so just those two additional declarations to declare. Thank you very much. That then takes us on through to agenda item 2, which is the exclusion of the press and the public. And for tonight's agenda, we're asked to consider it in relation to Annex 2 of agenda item 8, on the grounds that it contains information relating to the financial or business affairs of particular persons. I know in previous meetings that we will attempt to not refer to Annex 2, and therefore we won't need to go into private session when we consider that item. Of course, if any members do start to talk about Annex 2, I'm sure the monitoring officer will pop in and we'll go into private session. But I'd just like your permission in the event that we do talk about Annex 2, that we would go into private session at that point. Could I please see those in favour of that? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of that, should we discuss Annex 2. The third agenda item is the minutes of the previous executive meeting, which was held on the 26th of November 2020. I'll just give members an opportunity to raise any points or corrections that they want in the minutes. And if not, if I could see all those in favour of accepting the minutes, please. Thank you very much. So again, a clear majority in favour of accepting the minutes from the last meeting. That then moves us to agenda item 4, which is public participation. And we have 4 registered public participants this afternoon. So welcome to them all. And as per normal and previous meetings, each public participant has 3 minutes to talk to us. The first public participant is Gwen Swinburne, who has registered to speak on matters within the executive's remit. Gwen, you have 3 minutes. Can't hear anything, Gwen, at the moment. What I'll do is I'll come back to you later to see if there's a connection problem. Our second public participant today is Phil Pinder, and this is related to the agenda item, Make It York, and the impact of COVID-19. If I could now hand over to Phil for your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, thank you for the time. Over 100 people, mostly business owners or key decision makers within York, have signed a petition. I started asking you not to bail out Make It York. One reason to set up a limited company is to protect the council from being liable for any debts incurred by the business. The only reason, surely, for the request is because Make It York is not deemed financially viable to borrow money on its own merits on the markets. Make It York's private business, but receives special treatment, obviously, as a council-owned company. The council, as a landlord this week, has sent out threatening letters, threatening CCJs against every tenant who has built up 6 months' arrears. I can happily send copies of this letter to councillors if they would like it. And today you're considering this to basically give Make It York rent deferment for over 18 months. Make It York make a profit of around £35,000 per annum. The rent arrears they want to build up will take over 12 years to repay on that basis. All of the council tenants have to start repaying the 6 months arrears built up and must be repaid within 2 years. This is not a viable business plan. The business plan is weak. It assumes a growth in marketing revenue at a time when businesses will be cutting back. This surely means it is more likely to fail, and the money that they will borrow will end up being put back onto the council to repay, as Make It York will fail if you don't give them any more money beyond this money they're considering tonight. That will obviously put other council services at risk because you'll be liable for more debt. My proposed alternative is to restart Visit York as a separate company, transfer the city centre functions to York Bid, and transfer what is left of the business team to the local enterprise partnership. I'd ask you to consider carefully tonight, councillors, before you offer any extra funds to Make It York. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments, Phil, that will get taken into account when we consider Agenda 9 later tonight. I'm going to try again and go back to our first public speaker. Just a reminder. Oh, great! I was just going to remind you about *6. But
I've got it. I was pressing it, but it wasn't listening. But I'm good to go if you are. Yeah.
Yes, please. You have your 3 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, again. Last night, Chair, as tonight, we see the results of officers who are permitted by this administration to present biased, partial and entirely inadequate reports to committee. The usual modus is that the approved option is written in such a way that the councillors really have no option. In well-run authorities, councillors should always be presented with fully worked through options. This rarely happens here. To each of the statutory officers' shame. As Exhibit A, the report on Make It York reaches new depths. I would say if you support this outrageous subsidy to this failing and deeply unpopular organisation, that there would be grounds for a judicial review. If only the staff had written a balanced report explaining both sides, failings, achievements, options, costs, and consequences, plus whatever subsidies and special deals Make It York has already enjoyed at our expense. The fact that the organisation is deeply unpopular and has been failing for a long time is not discussed, nor the options of dissolving and splitting up the viable functions and eliminating the rest. Nor have the statutory officers been honest with you regards the true and very limited costs of dissolving the business. Just ploughing more money into this organisation is what the council does best, simply rewarding failure with our taxes. Instead, why not show some backbone and say no more, rather than blindly writing bigger cheques for the same inevitable failure? Just stop. The staff and current executive member clearly need support from the business community to show them what can be done. The York Bid, the LEP, others, I am sure, can quickly pull together a proposal that would reinvigorate and reinvent the responsibilities of this failing business after it is dissolved. Thank you, Chair. Happy Christmas, everybody.
Thank you very much. Happy Christmas to you too. And your comments will get taken into account when we get to the relevant agenda items later.
Thanks, Keith. Bye.
Thank you. That moves us on to our third public speaker today, who is Martin Bradnam on behalf of the Hospitality Association York, and this is in relation to agenda item 9, Make It York. And Martin, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor. Can you hear me okay there?
I can do, yes, thanks.
Great, thank you so much. I would like to raise concerns over the Make It York financial request. I feel the council needs to very cautiously and clearly question this request and thoroughly consider alternatives before any money is agreed or granted. The City of York Council needs to ask the following questions. Number one, what is key to the success of the city to successfully market and promote York as a tourism destination, attract new businesses and develop events and attractions? Number two, are there more cost-effective ways of delivering that? Number three, what part of Make It York is performing and what is clearly not? Number four, could the organisation be reorganised with more direct council leadership? And number five, is Make It York delivering on its service level agreements and key performance indicators? And are these challenging and appropriate enough currently? With challenging times ahead, this is an opportunity to change and improve delivery. One example of this is the Information Bureau. Is it the best location? Could it be located at the railway station and a presence in Parliament Square? Could this move more online? Is the current structure allowing the organisation to be collaborative and responsive enough? Is the leadership dynamic with a clear strategy? Is the senior management effective? Sean Bullock as lead is divisional within the city and does not have the same standing as Steve Brown. The organisation cannot afford to have someone in charge who is not uniting the city and instilling confidence. Is the organisation appropriate? The following team members have left the organisation in recent times: Paul Whiting, Kay Hyde, Chris Price, Sue Frumin, and Simon Middleton. This staff turnover raises a number of questions about the internal stability of the organisation. A number of these employees have left at crucial times, rendering the organisation ineffective at key times during the epidemic response. Some of the costs that CYC have been asked to contribute towards poorly managed exits. Are these reasonable and a fair cost to City of York Council and the taxpayer? And are these fair, or simply put, because they did not want to work under the new senior management at the organisation? With many businesses making redundancies to react to the current situation, is this organisation considering the same? Are staffing levels, office costs reasonable? Is there space within council offices available to reduce office costs? Contribution of costs from the council will be unpopular with the local electorate. While this may support tourism, it has to be justified and be cost effective as possible. Is the underwriting a loan that Make It York will repay, and is this feasible? There are other DMOs, such as Welcome to Yorkshire, who would be eager to support York and the council. Could parts of Make It York organisation be split? Could this make competing DMOs more accountable, more competitive, to gain the best outcome for York and its residents? We're at a crossroads, and the council must ask these questions and hold Make It York fully accountable. However, there is also considerable risk should the business fail. Phil Pinder's counter-proposal of winding up Make It York needs considerable consideration as part of a balanced review. I urge the council, do not rush this through, but carefully consider the best options for York given the past history and performance of this organisation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Will get taken into account when we consider agenda item 9 later. Our fourth public speaker is Councillor Douglas, who again has registered to speak on agenda item 9, Make It York. Councillor Douglas, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. What a year. Make It York has been far from immune to the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. The report in front of you starts to give clarity on a serious and very concerning situation for the organisation and for CYC. Make It York are contracted by its owner, CYC, to carry out functions covering economic growth, inward investment, tourism, markets and events. All are tremendously important to York's economic health and the recovery of our city from the COVID-19 pandemic. These functions must continue, they cannot stop. The long-term health of our city depends upon you, the executive, getting the delivery of these functions right. I'm asking the leader, the executive member for culture, leisure and communities, where responsibility for the control of the CYC Make It York contract lies, and the executive member for economy and strategic planning, responsible for the vitally important economic development aspects of the contract, to take a long, hard look at how this astonishing multi-year, multi-million-pound bailout ask of the taxpayers of York will and must produce tangible, real and inclusive benefits for the whole of our city. When you're listening to York businesses of all sizes and their representative organisations, it's clear the board of Make It York is totally unaware of how they are viewed in the business community. They're legally contracted by the council to work with and serve. The common view is they are deaf to what York businesses need from them, how partnership working is vital, and how they should be proactively supporting economic development of all types, not hindering it. As board members, I implore Councillors Smalley and Craghill and their colleagues to take this issue seriously. Their performance in the area of inward investment over the past years has been on a national scale woeful, and I and others suggest they've totally ignored this element of their contract. I find it very concerning that York's largest hospitality association has put its backing behind a petition against the bailout proposal in front of you. Questions must be asked about the CYC governance and TCAL company structure of Make It York, its ability to carry out the functions it's tasked with under the current contract, its role in our city, and ultimately the need to Make It York in its current format. I suggest the company needs an overhaul, and CYC's governance of its wholly owned subsidiary needs an overhaul. I ask you to carefully consider the financial commitment you are asked to approve on behalf of the cash-strapped council, residents and taxpayers of York. Is it value for money? And to carefully consider if the finances add up given the strong concerns across our city around the ability and willingness of Make It York to deliver what is mandated within its existing and soon to be renewed in March 2021 contract. Now is the time. It simply can't be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Douglas. Your comments will get taken into account when we discuss agenda item 9. So if I could thank all of our public speakers today, who I know will be removed out of this particular Zoom room, but are very welcome to continue and encouraged to watch the meeting that is now being live streamed. That then moves us through the agenda, and we now come to agenda item 5, and this is the forward plan on pages 21 and 22, just to give anybody an opportunity to ask any questions. If not, if I could see those in favour of accepting the forward plan, please. So that's a clear majority in favour. Thank you very much. That then moves us through to agenda item 6, which is an update on the council preparations for the UK's exit from the European Union and the end of transition, which is pages 23 to 32 in your packs, and I'll ask Will to introduce this to us.
Thank you very much. So the paper you've got in front of you gives a summary of the activities that the Council's been undertaking to prepare for the end of the transition period following the UK's departure from the EU. I think it's fair to say there's been some twists and turns in this, and at the point of, I believe as I speak now, there's still uncertainty around the future relationships between the UK and the EU. This obviously makes it quite difficult to fully assess the implications for the council. I think, however, from a council perspective, based on the advice we've received from government, we're confident that we've done what we can to prepare in different service areas, and that's listed within the paper. We've also discussed with other authorities across the country to ensure that we're doing similar things in preparation to other authorities. So I think we've pretty much covered all bases that we should be doing. From a wider city point of view, it's difficult to assess the full impacts, obviously without knowing what the future arrangements will be. From conversations with organisations across the city, the focus of many organisations has clearly been on COVID over the last year, and therefore the space and the time to undertake necessary preparations for the end of the transition period has been limited. I think in some cases there's a lack of certainty as to what they can do and whether what they've done is appropriate. But from our perspective, we will continue to engage with organisations as best we can, and to ensure we're signposting to the advice provided by government as it is available. I think one thing I would highlight is positively is the settlement scheme. The latest figures show that of the estimate of 7,000 EU residents within the city, there's been 6,650 applications to the EU settlement scheme, which shows I think most people have undertaken an application. We will continue through for the next 6 months, which up to the end of the window for applying to the settlement scheme, to promote this within all communities, to ensure those that wish to have had a chance to apply. Yeah, happy to take any questions on the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Obviously happy to open it to any comments and questions. I think what I would say first is interesting to cast our minds back to 2019 when Brexit was dominating all of the headlines, to 2020 where Brexit has been understandably overshadowed by the events of the pandemic. However, despite the challenges posed by the pandemic, we have had to continue our work in preparing the city for the potential impacts of Brexit. Of course, Brexit is an incredibly important issue, and in this late stage of 2020, it is making a last-minute comeback. As many people will know from recent news coverage, a year on from 2019, and we still have uncertainty. Negotiations with the EU continue to take place, with the deadline recently extended, and we wait to see what developments arise over the Christmas period. As outlined in point 2 of the report, with negotiations continuing, it's actually extremely difficult for the council and other organisations, including businesses in the city, to fully assess the potential impact, because we simply don't know what the full nature of any future arrangements will be. And it's this continued uncertainty which is now causing concern in the city, particularly at a time when businesses are focusing their resources and attention in responding to the pandemic, as outlined on point 42 of the report. There is no doubt that the threat of a no-deal Brexit looms large, and as detailed in bullet point 45, the Bank of England has warned of the significant impacts on the UK economy in a no-deal scenario, and therefore the potential negative economic impact in our city. Given the experiences of the last few months and the challenges ahead, I'd certainly urge the government to do what they can to secure a deal with the EU and bring certainty regarding the future arrangements, particularly at this time when uncertainty is already rife. I would, as Will just mentioned at the end there, strongly encourage those in the city who can apply to the settlement scheme to do so right away. EU residents already in the country have until June 2021 to apply, and the council, I know, will continue to promote the scheme in the run-up to the end of the transition period. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. The one word which most succinctly describes this year for our local businesses must be uncertainty. Whilst it's been mentioned the pandemic has posed the most immediate major challenge to businesses in York, the Brexit deadline is fast approaching. Just 17 days to go, according to government website, which if you go on there, had a clock ticking down. So the business community is rightly worried about the impacts that failure to reach a deal will have on the future of our local economy. As part of the work that's been done in response to the pandemic, there's been a series of roundtable events with a variety of sectors and stakeholders in the city. The report sets out that whilst they've been preoccupied with the pandemic, they've really been left with no time to plan for the increased bureaucracy, costs and disruption that the end of the transition period is bringing. It's as though the last 4 years has not been used wisely. There is a lack of clarity. What is it that companies are being asked to prepare for in the government adverts that are appearing with increasing frequency on our TVs and radio? The lack of technical information, and many of the businesses in the city require detailed information about how they can export and import items. That information is still not available. The government is failing to provide clarity, and the support to businesses compounds the monumental challenge that the business community has faced over the last few months. Small businesses currently face the real possibility of the introduction of major tariffs, the increase of red tape and documentation, which will see a significant increase in the cost of operating. This will mean increased prices being passed on to local consumers and also pose a detrimental impact on the local business community. So the Council, along with the Chamber of Commerce, Federation of Small Businesses, LEP and other partners, continue to work with local businesses to try and get information out to them. Even with a matter of a few weeks remaining, the government must realise the extent to which years of uncertainty, now combined with the monumental challenge of the pandemic, is impacting on businesses that are already very worn down. their staff have been working very hard trying to keep businesses afloat. There's now an urgent need for clear guidance as well as substantial financial support to assist with the transition preparations for cash-strapped businesses. They are in many cases at the end of their reserves. As the report sets out, the council locally is doing all that it can to provide support and guidance, but it's down to central government to set aside ideology and provide the support and the clarity that businesses so desperately need to ensure that the local communities and people's livelihoods are protected. I think I'd like to thank officers for the amount of work that's gone into this report and for the continued efforts that have been made over the last 4 years by officers to try and make sense of what government have been sending out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smalley.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to start, I guess, where Councillor Waller has just ended in thanking officers for this report. I guess it was a nigh on impossible task for Will and his colleagues to write a report about the impact of Brexit for the council and the city. And I think the report does a good job of just setting out exactly where we've been and where we are at the moment. I think just like businesses, the council's had a tough time trying to understand where exactly we are and what exactly the impacts will be as things change and as we hear things in the media, just like residents and businesses across York. I am glad to see the work that's ongoing in supporting EU residents in York and through this uncertain and particularly anxious time for us all. As the report sets out, we've sought to proactively engage with EU citizens living in York to offer advice and support, especially through the settlement scheme application process. From the letters and direct outreach work to the appointment of a dedicated community involvement officer, we've focused on more widely supporting EU residents in the city through this uncertain time. And I'd like to take the chance to say thank you to the communities team who have played a large role in providing this crucial support. EU citizens are our friends, neighbours and work colleagues and are very much part of what makes York such a special place to live. Due to the mishandling of the Brexit crisis and breaking of promises by this and the previous government, EU citizens living in the UK and living in York have been living under a cloud of uncertainty. It's very encouraging to see that so many of York's EU residents have applied for the scheme. And whilst, as Councillor Waller and yourself, Chair, have mentioned, the very worrying possibility of no-deal Brexit still remains, I would encourage all EU residents who have made York their home to apply for this scheme and secure their rights as soon as possible. We do have, as you say, six months left, but we can't rest on our laurels, and we will do as much as we can to push that message to every single EU resident that has not yet applied and started the settlement scheme process. Whilst the government have failed to answer our calls for more clarity and support and actually more timely information about how many EU residents have applied for the scheme, we are continuing to reach out to all EU nationals and support them in every way we can, and we'll continue to work hard locally to assist every EU citizen who wants to exercise their right to remain to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I can't see any other speakers, so if I could take you to the recommendations for this report, please, and if I could see all those in favour of accepting them. Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting the recommendations for agenda item 6. Thank you, Will. So that then brings us onto agenda item 7, which is the City of York Council Recovery and Renewal Strategy and our December update. And I'll hand over to Ian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hopefully the report is fairly straightforward and provides latest updates on a range of matters. I would just draw members' attention to York's overall case numbers and performance, and also the recognition at a national level of the work that has been done on test and trace. And within the region, we've had for some time now the lowest figures. Sharon can obviously shortly provide a bit more update on that in terms of the very latest position. I think we do absolutely need to stress, though, that we can't be complacent. Clearly, people have seen recent news coverage in terms of cases certainly rising in certain areas. And we know through past history that things can change quickly in certain areas. And so absolutely, as a city, we need to remain vigilant, and everyone take caution in terms of the activities that they are doing. Looking ahead, I think it is important to recognise, I think that clearly there are further challenges. And in the early part of next year, we will still clearly be facing the challenges in terms of virus and having to continue doing all the things we have been doing over recent months. Hopefully, though, clearly the vaccine will start to see a return to some normality during the next year. However, we do know that post-COVID, there will still remain many challenges across many of our services. So the impact of COVID in terms of the vulnerable children, vulnerable adults will still be there. And clearly there are issues in terms of mental health issues, general employment issues in terms of the economy, and financial pressures that will face a number of our residents. The impact on business clearly will last for some time, and crucially is the work that we will do in terms of supporting business and making York the place that we all want people to return to. And clearly in the next few months, our financial plans will start to take shape, and obviously there will be reports to the executive and then to full council on the budget. And clearly there are ongoing financial pressures which will affect next year, but also future years going forward. And of course, next year we face many other challenges to address: climate change, major projects such as York Central, transport strategies, to name just a few of those challenges that face us. And as if that wasn't enough, clearly there are still issues to be resolved in terms of devolution, local government reorganisation, and at the same time, major changes in terms of how the NHS is structured as well. So I just mentioned those issues really to recognise that clearly the last year has been like no other really, but I think we all very much need to prepare for next year being equally challenging for many different reasons. I think as this is the last executive of this calendar year, I think I would just like to finish by thanking all of our staff for their efforts over the past year. We've been in this pandemic now for some 10 months, and across all areas of the council, people have given huge commitment, supported each other, supported residents and businesses. And that passion and excellence, I believe, will actually serve us well for meeting the challenges next year. I'll stop at that point, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. And obviously, very happy to open it for any questions and comments. For me, since the last update to executive last month, we've of course exited the second national lockdown and are currently in tier 2 restrictions of the government's revised 3-tier lockdown system. As many people will have seen from London and parts of the southeast, the 3-tiered system is due to be reviewed this week, and the announcement regarding any further changes is meant to be taking place tomorrow. In York, the city has done incredibly well to drive down the infection across the city, something that all residents and local businesses should be congratulated on. We fully recognise, however, that the virus is still circulating in the city, and that is why we're encouraging everyone to remain cautious and to stay safe this Christmas. Whatever tier York is placed in tomorrow, we will continue to work with local businesses, the police and other organisations to ensure that people are safe in York. Further to this, we know that the economic challenges of the pandemic are significant, and despite the festive cheer that December brings, there are many local businesses and families who are facing financial difficulties this Christmas. And that is why we're continuing with our lobbying efforts to urge the government to provide more financial support for local businesses and households on low incomes. In addition to this lobbying, the Council has been working to deliver additional grant payments to struggling local businesses, as outlined in point 16 of the report. We have also worked with local business leaders to target the discretionary element of that funding to those businesses who need it the most. We have also allocated £200,000 to go towards providing free school meals over the Christmas, February half term and the Easter holidays. This funding will also provide extra support to families with or without children with household essentials, energy bills and water bills. Little like Ian, the last thing that I would like to say is a big thank you to all of the city's key workers, but in particular with my hat as council leader to council staff for their work up till now, and we know throughout the holiday season. And one point to reference is that it was pleasing to see that the council was recognised for its communications work through the Public Sector Communication Excellence Awards. It's incredibly important in our efforts to reduce the virus that all the latest public health advice and guidance is communicated to as many people as possible. And I'd like to thank our staff, the communications team and partners for all of their efforts in that work. And with all that in mind, I'm very happy to recommend noting the content of the report. And then I will go to Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just briefly like to mention the excellent work which has been carried out by the local public health teams over the last month and before. Since our last meeting, scientific developments have seen vaccines being developed and distributed in a time frame which only recently was thought to be impossible. Vaccinations in York will start shortly. The staff were being trained yesterday. However, it is important to say this does not mean that all of our other local efforts are slowing down. They will all continue. With our local tracing system operating really well, the rollout of enhanced asymptomatic testing is another major step in our fight to bring down the local infection rates. This is a major task and is a testament to the collaborative citywide approach taken by all the council's teams together with partners across the city. The continued effort and sacrifices made by our residents and businesses play a most important role in our local response. We have seen what a major difference that local effort has had on the coronavirus infection rates in York. As we await the announcements of the restriction level review, we must make sure we all continue in our individual and collective efforts to protect our city and each other. Remember, hands, face, space is the message to everyone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll go to Councillor de Gorn.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin by echoing the thanks for local residents, businesses, and also, as Ian said, the staff and volunteers who've worked incredibly hard to reduce the spread of the virus, as demonstrated by the data we currently have. It's encouraging to see the scale of activity that continues to take place, supporting residents and businesses in the city, even as we approach the end of 2020. And of course, it remains a difficult time of year for the many people out there. It's worth highlighting that many of our local businesses are back open, as indicated in point 18 in the report. It's really important that we get behind local businesses at this time of year, especially our small independent businesses, so we can help them survive this really tough period. Therefore, I would urge everyone to support their local shops and businesses and protect the spaces we love in the city. I'd also want to touch on point 20, which is encouraging to see that local economy is performing relatively well in comparison to other areas in the UK.
as outlined in the report, this does mean that we doesn't mean, which we can't rest on our laurels, and we must continue to do what we can to accelerate recovery of the city, whether that be continuing with our programmes, lobbying the government for more funding or other urgent actions. I want to finish on the point about mental health, which Ian touched on, that over the next few weeks we're likely to see people seeking support, and every one of us can do.
You've gone on to mute, Councillor de Gorn.
Sorry, not sure how that happened. Okay. Yeah, I was saying the importance of mental health and the support that we can all offer, whether it's through friends, relatives, or people that we know, and also the professional support which is available and volunteer support which is available to help at this difficult time. And I'm pleased that we've come together with our partners to promote this open conversation about mental health in the city and support that's out there. And so I'm happy to support the recommendations.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us between pages 33 and 42. And with those comments, could I see those in favour of accepting the recommendations? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting report 7. Thank you to Ian. So that then moves us on to agenda item 8, and that's the new stadium leisure complex commercial proposal on restaurant units that's included between pages 43 and 58 in the agenda. And I'm just going to check with Ian who's kicking off on this agenda item. I think it might have been Patrick Looker, is that correct?
Yeah, Patrick and Nick are going to cover this in a bit of detail.
Oh, great. I need to move to my second screen on Zoom. That's why I didn't see Patrick and Nick pop up on the screen. So welcome, and over to, I believe, Patrick first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report gives members an update on the community stadium project in relation to the commercial deal that was entered into in November 2017 relating to the restaurant units on the site. The report gives the background of some of the key decisions that members have made over the funding of the stadium project. Since 2012, the development has been dependent on income from commercial land receipt, and updates have regularly been given back to executive, with members agreeing to proceed to financial close in 2017. At that point, the council was due a commercial land receipt for the sale totalling £3.8 million. In order to progress to financial close, at that time, the fund who were buying the 3 restaurant units required the council to take a reduced capital receipt if a number of the units were not let at practical completion. This was set at £687,000 if only 1 unit was let, and £1.375 million if no units were let. We are now close to practical completion, and the risk has crystallised as none of the units at this point in time have been let. A proposal has been put forward to the council whereby the council can take a 25-year lease on the units on commercial terms and receive the full receipt. There is also an option to take all 3 units and not receive either the £3.8 million commercial land receipt or a £630,000 contribution to the build costs of the units. The report in front of you has modelled the 3 options. Option 1, the council does not receive £1.375 million, which leaves a funding shortfall for the stadium project. In this option, the council would require additional borrowing at a cost of £96,000 per annum. This was effectively the risk that was accepted by the council in 2017. Option 2, the council receives the full £1.375 million, but is required to pay a commercial rent for the units. We will then need to sublet the units, which comes with a number of risks, such as if the units are unlet, the council is responsible for the service charges and business rates. Also, if the council was to sublet at a rent lower than we pay the fund has an opportunity to reject the sublet. Whilst we've had positive conversations with the developer about amending this clause in the heads of terms, it does add risk that we would be unable to sublet these units. Option 3, the council does not receive 4.4 million, which leaves a funding shortfall for the stadium project. This would result in additional borrowing costs of 308,000, but we would take ownership of the unit and therefore be free to sublet on any terms. From paragraph 42 onwards, the report shows the financial modelling of the options. Option 1 is the only certain option, whereby the council has an additional cost of £96,000 per annum borrowing. Option 2, we've considered a number of scenarios with different rent levels, void periods, and whether the market improves. However, in the majority of scenarios modelled, the cost to the council is higher than that in option 1. The detail behind those scenarios is shown in confidential annex 2. Option 3, similar to option 2, we've modelled the same scenarios, and in all of these, the costs to the council are higher than option 1. We show a graphical representation of the anticipated cash flows to the council in annex 1. And again, you'll see that in almost all instances, from a financial perspective, option 1 has the least risk and best value to the council. That, therefore, is the recommended option. It's worth saying that the report was considered by Customer and Corporate Scrutiny Management Committee on December the 7th, and quite a lively debate was held in that meeting, and it's fair to say that members were broadly supportive of the recommended option at that point in time. So I'd just like Nick to add a few comments around the commercial property market that we're currently experiencing.
Thank you, Patrick, and good evening, everybody. Well, in the current market, and having regard, of course, to the ongoing pandemic, the food and beverage market for these types of units has very much faced considerable challenges. The usual types of occupier for these style of units were the national chains, of course, where we've seen a considerable number of closures nationwide, which in turn has had a downwards knock-on effect on attainable rentals and capital values. And the sentiment in the commercial market generally is that demand by smaller operators may be greater than the nationals in the near future, but likely achievable values will not be at levels previously attained pre-COVID. And as Patrick's outlined, modelling these adjusted market rentals, which we've seen into the 3 scenarios, provides that option 1 has the lower financial risk profile of the options available to the council, as Patrick said.
Thank you very much to Patrick and Nick for the introduction, and I'll now open the item for any comments, questions or introduction, but I'll go to Councillor Eyre first.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to start by acknowledging the incredible job that York City Knights have done over the last few weeks in terms of their unfortunately unsuccessful bid for Super League. It wasn't the news we were looking for, but it really did demonstrate the way we could showcase both the Knights as a club, the city as a sporting venue, and the stadium itself, both nationally and internationally. It really has demonstrated the potential of both of our sporting clubs and the stadium that we have. And I think with the Rugby World Cup coming up in the autumn, it really does demonstrate that we are delivering a facility that can be seen as world class and certainly of regional significance. As Patrick alluded to in his introduction, we are getting ever closer to the opening of the stadium, which is the reason for bringing this report at the moment. I know GLL are working very hard in the background to try and make sure that we do achieve the 2020 opening. It's worth reflecting on what we are actually delivering for the city. So we will be having, as I mentioned, a state-of-the-art £8,000 seater stadium, a community hub with library, community offices, York Against Cancer, one of the NHS facilities, which will be something of real innovation within and supporting leisure markets.
Sorry, Councillor Eyre, your sound is just cutting out occasionally.
I shall try to move closer.
Thank you.
Just going through, so in terms of the situation we're in now, back in 2014, the decision was taken to include the leisure estate as part of this project, which doubled the stadium budget from around 19 million to 37 million, at which point the whole scheme did become reliant on the capital receipts of around about £12 million. The reliance on that capital scheme did mean that the scheme couldn't progress until such time as a land deal was agreed. And by 2016, that reliance on that land deal had led to a small shortfall within the budget. That then gave the executive at the time either the option to not progress with the scheme, to take the abortive costs and to restart the entire procurement process, which would have been hugely expensive and added even further delay into the particular project. So at that point, the decision was taken to progress, but with the additional risk around the capital receipt, the potential that it wouldn't quite achieve the full amount that we were hoping for. as Nick alluded to in his comments, we have had in many ways a perfect storm as we approach the opening of the stadium. We have had the significant impact of COVID and knock-on effects across the entire restaurant market. And I think it's fair to say this is not the time we would be looking to opening restaurant units if we were at all given the choice. That left us with the situation we're in, and it's certainly we have explored every single option we possibly can in terms of how we maximise the capital receipts of the council and minimise those costs. As was mentioned, we did take this to scrutiny, who explored all of the options that can be seen on page 55. There are a range of options, and the reality is that in a very best case scenario, the council may be slightly financially better off, but in the majority of cases, the council would end up being significantly financially worse off. And I think for those reasons, scrutiny came to the same reason as the report, that the least risk option is probably the one to take. And I think before we move on and talk about sort of the gap that's there, I think it's worth just reflecting on the significant amount of investment that's been brought into this project. So it still remains, even with the slightly reduction in the capital receipt we've received, the vast majority of funding for this project has been brought in externally and not through prudential borrowing. So we're still receiving a land deal of circa £10 million, the Section 106 payment of around about £15 million, and around about £2 million from the Football Stadium Improvement Fund. So the burden for the taxpayer has been reduced as much as possible. So I think with that, Chair, happy to support the recommendations on page 43, paragraph 3.
Thank you very much for that, and I'm sure we'll come back to those recommendations in a little bit. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the updates there from the executive member and also from senior officers. I'm aware of the pun here that this has been a pure political football, and I seriously don't want to continue doing that. And so my comments here are I have to make them, but it's not in a divisive way, if you like. I think the risk and the gamble that the executive took on letting the restaurant units in 2017 hasn't paid off, and I think that's just been said. Really, it may have been a measured risk, but in early 2017 we did know of the national concern about private equity funds fueling unsustainable expansion into the hospitality sector, and that decision was taken in that climate. And what's happened is millions of more pounds have been added to the bill for the community stadium. I think what I'd like to call for, I think I've called for it before on a range of topics, is a little bit more genuine engagement in this process. I've had lots of briefings on the community stadium, and they've been genuine about providing assurance to me and the opposition. But we haven't had an opportunity for real insight or input into what is a major development project that spanned a number of council administrations. And it may have always been this way with administrations and oppositions just playing it out like this, but that's not the way I go about things. Especially when financial package will continue to affect future terms of administrations. But look, I don't want to dent optimism. Again, following on from the executive member, I really do want to pay tribute to York City Knights. I'll take this opportunity to do that. John Flatman and all those in that team that put that bid together. The wrong decision was made by Super League, but I think it does just show that the appetite for elite sport in the city is very high, and the community, fans and supporters and residents can get behind that. So, I did want to put that on record as well. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. I can see Councillor Eyre, you want to come back in.
Yeah, just clarity in terms of that tie on the comments Councillor Myers made about the commercial risk. That commercial risk was taken in 2014 when the decision to lease those units to the pension fund was made, and a figure of £12 million was put onto that capital receipt. That's the point when the risk was introduced to the scheme, not in 16-17. That was the fallout of that, of realising that £12 million had not been achieved, and the figure was nearer £9 to £10 million. So there was not an option in 16-17 to revisit that decision to put the commercial deal in there. It was in there for 2 years, and that's why the scheme hadn't progressed from 14 to 16. So I think there was nothing that could have been done in 16-17 to mitigate that risk other than to abandon the entire procurement process and start again from scratch. I think the report is quite clear on that one, and past reports have been quite clear. So there was nothing about commercial risk that could be mitigated in 16-17 other than in the way it was done to try and cover off the last £1 million that was missing.
Thank you very much for that. So we've got the recommendations on agenda 8 that have been proposed and as highlighted were discussed and supported at the relevant scrutiny committee. Could I see all those in favour of accepting those recommendations? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those recommendations on agenda item 8. That then moves us through to agenda item 9 on Make It York and the impact of COVID-19. Pardon me. And we're joined on this item by both officers and also representatives of Make It York. But what I'll first do is hand over to Charlie Croft and just ask Charlie to introduce it, but also introduce colleagues from Make It York, please. Charlie. Sorry,
yes,
hold on 1 second, Charlie. I can see Councillor de Gorn is waving at me, which I'll just check.
Off mute. It was just with reference to a comment from one of the public speakers, just to declare an interest as the director of a bid. There was a suggestion that some particular course of action might be taken. I don't think we on the papers any reference to that, but just so for the record.
So this is just a personal interest, which
Yes.
you'll already have declared on your register of
that's
interests
correct.
as a director of the bid.
That's correct.
Thank you. In which case, I can also now see Councillor Waller indicating. Councillor Waller.
Yes, I am also a director of the bid.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Charlie.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I introduce Sean Bullock, Managing Director of Make It York, and Steve Morrell of Morrell Middleton, who represents Make It York's accountants. First up, Patrick Looker, in fact, will introduce the report firstly, given its financial aspects and content, and I will follow on from Patrick.
Okay, thank you again. Yes, this paper gives executive an update on the financial impact of the pandemic on the council-owned company Make It York. It should be noted that pre-pandemic Make It York was operating within its financial parameters and providing the council an annual dividend. Much of Make It York's income comes from events that it holds across the city centre. The company budgeted for income levels of 5.2 million this financial year, whereas latest projections are that only 2.2 million will be received. The main impact on income has been the Christmas market, which budgeted for an income of £875,000. There's also income from the visitor information centres, that is down £750,000, and the Shambles market down around £300,000. Whilst it has been possible for the company to reduce costs by approximately £2 million over that period, that still leaves a significant financial deficit of over £1 million for the company this year. Council officers have been working with Make It York from the summer onwards as to the financial impact of the pandemic, and it was initially assumed that the company could manage using reserves and cash balances. Once it became clear, however, that the Christmas market would be cancelled this year, the board were informed that the company would require additional financial support in order to continue to trade. It is important to point out that these income losses would have been suffered by the council had those services been provided in-house. Meetings were held between council officers and Make It York officers and their accountants, and to discuss updated projections and assumptions for both this financial year and future years. The results of those discussions are included within the financial cash flows within the report. It's important to note that the projections are Make It York's, not the council's, but we are satisfied that there is a rationale to the assumptions and a fair view of the potential recovery. Appendix 1 provides a commentary around the assumptions of the business going forward. It shows that revenues do recover in 21-22, although still below pre-pandemic levels, and build up to those more normal levels in 24-25. At the same time, the company is reviewing its cost base and seeking to remove costs from the organisation, which will improve profitability. The company is also taking advantage of ongoing furlough support from the government. The request, which is recommended to members, is that the council forego the income stream it would receive from city centre activities, a total of 474,000, to provide an emergency loan facility of up to 300,000 if necessary, and to provide a guarantee that the council supports the company as a going concern. There was a further request from the board and the company to forego the commercial rent payable from Museum Street. However, in order to be consistent with our dealings with other commercial property tenants, it is proposed that any arrears, those arrears are deferred and still paid to the council when resources allow. It is important that the amount we are foregoing is the income stream that they would have earned from activity within the city centre. The lost revenue to the council will be included within the council's COVID costs and proposed to be funded from the general COVID grant. I would also like to add that should members accept the recommendation, we will require Make It York to formally provide monthly management accounts and regular updates to the council on its future forecasts, and we will update these reports to executive through the regular monitoring process. I'll pass over to Charlie to add there.
Thank you, Patrick. A number of public speakers tonight, Chair, have referred to the very important issues about what Make It York provides for the council, the services that it undertakes, issues of organisation of those services and value for money. Those very important issues are not the subject of this paper tonight. However, they will of course come back to the executive under the guise of discussions about the future contract, and they will come back to the executive in February, and they are matters of discussion at officer level between the council and Make It York at the moment in preparation for that. I think it's obviously really important to stress that if we don't secure Make It York's position through a decision this evening, it won't be possible to have those discussions. And indeed, the company would clearly be wound up and collapse in a disorderly fashion. That would clearly cause massive service disruption, but it would also incur very significant additional costs to the council in terms of dealing with the repercussions of that, and would leave debt clearly across the city, potentially unfunded redundancies for individual members of staff, and so on. If we do, however, support Make It York's financial position in the short term, that allows those important discussions about the future services that Make It York provides to take place. They don't prejudice those discussions, but they allow us to have them in an orderly manner. And then just one very small point and an apology that in paragraph 16D, there is a typo there where it says the year 25-26. It should read 24-25. So apologies for that typo. So I think that's enough by way of introduction. Clearly, Sean and Steve will be able to answer any questions that members might have.
Thank you very much to Patrick and Charlie for that introduction. And as said, obviously you can ask questions to Patrick or Charlie, or for Make It York to Sean and to Steve. And before I open it for questions, I'll go to Councillor Waller first.
Thank you, Chair. As one of the themes tonight has been recognising the work that's been done in response to the pandemic, I'd like to thank the Make It York staff for the work that they've done in supporting so many city businesses throughout the challenging year. It's been a time for all partners to work together, and that has been a very strong feature of the last few months. Whilst unfortunate, the financial challenges facing Make It York are not surprising. They've affected businesses up and down the country and indeed across the world. and therefore there is a tough commercial environment across the country. The tourism industry in particular requires unprecedented support and innovation to save jobs and to build back a more resilient industry despite the challenges of this year. The Council's tourism recovery strategy is a crucial part of the city's long-term recovery programme, and that has been debated amongst many partners, and Make It York has played a crucial role in the development and overall support of the local business sector at this challenging time. So the paper sets out the extent to which our local post-pandemic recovery plans are impacted by the future viability of Make It York, most notably the impact that the potential loss of Visit York to the long-term development and management of York's vital tourism economy is worrying. Indeed, the call to create Visit York itself came from the Economic Review in 2007, from a previous financial situation the council found itself in. So by agreeing the recommendations as set out in the report, we can make sure that we're doing all that is possible to support our local tourism industry through this difficult period and continue to work and develop a comprehensive recovery plan, which will see local and regional businesses thrive once again. Tourism is very much a regional issue, and some of the comments made by the business community have been quite strident. I'm familiar with this. I'm sure we all are. But what has been striking has been the need across the city to ensure there's a team approach to responding to the economic pressures arising from COVID. As Charlie Croft has mentioned, paragraph 19 details the work that will be done on developing a new contract. There will be many discussions about this, and I anticipate many comments and opinions, even more than we've heard tonight, coming forward in that work. And I would hope that these can be constructive and think of what the city needs as a whole, not for an individual. A new contract, therefore, I hope can be an assessment, and the fact that it's happening tonight is an integral part of the decision that's being made by executive. Some of the speakers referred to taking a long, hard look. And the only way that we can do that is by preventing Make It York crashing out. And therefore having the time to review all that it is doing in terms of support for the business community and the work that we do as a council. And therefore, I think that there will be many discussions to be had in the forthcoming months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Waller. I'll go to Councillor Widdowson next.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst unfortunate, the financial challenges facing Make It York are not surprising and are actually the same financial challenges facing businesses operating in the same tough commercial environments across the country, as my fellow councillor has already alluded to. I think most people will know that there has been a lot of local coverage about this report over recent days. And actually, there's been some very vocal support for Make It York, and I just wanted to highlight some of the positive comments made over the last few days. John Flatman, chairman of York City Knights, has quite rightly pointed out that the Knights were supported by Make It York on a number of different projects, including the successful Rugby League World Cup bid. Andrew Lawson, director of York Bid, quite rightly underlined that given the challenges we face, every organisation in the city must pull together to make a positive contribution to our economic recovery. Richard Wood, a businessman in the city who is currently working with Make It York on their own quarter development, praised Make It York for their role in raising York's profile and attracting investment into the city. And David Carefoot, chair of the York and North York LEP, reiterated the importance of retaining the expertise within Make It York to seize greater opportunities in the future. These are just some of the voices that have come out in support of Make It York over the last few days. And I believe that by agreeing the recommendation as set out in the report, we can make sure that we are doing what we can to support our local economy through this extremely difficult period.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'm being a bit of a historian today, but I just wanted to respond to some of the comments made by Councillor Douglas at the beginning of the meeting, where she was so critical of the governance structures and the contracting mechanism that was in place with Make It York. I think it's just worth pointing out that it was the Labour administration in 2014 that decided to create Make It York and set in place the very governance structures that she's so keen to criticise today. So I think it's welcome that for once they're able to acknowledge their own failings as an administration as they move forward. But I think that governance structure is something that was put in place and something we inherited in 2015 and have worked on over those periods to get a better working relationship with Make It York. And I think that's something that we're getting at now. And I think, as Councillor Waller alluded to, the contract is being renewed. And it's about moving on and how we start to deliver those outcomes. And I think we're now in a far better place with better governance structures, better contractual arrangements. And I'm sure we can deliver better for the city going forward.
Thank you very much. Before I bring Councillor Myers in, I'm just conscious that Sean and Steve, there hasn't been a direct question, but I thought I'd go to you, Sean, in case you want to make any comments following Councillors Waller, Eyre and Widdowson.
Well, thank you very much, Keith, and thank you, Councillor Widdowson and Waller for those comments. I think yeah, they're very much appreciated, but I think that they're also very accurate. I think we have all worked very hard together over an extraordinarily difficult period. I think, as Councillor Eyre says, governance arrangements are under review, and I think are getting stronger and will only get stronger. And I think we shouldn't, as a slightly separate point, I think we shouldn't underestimate the value of the board of directors of Make It York and the value they bring to the city. A very high caliber board now, and I think real as an insight into economic and commercial issues as well as cultural issues. So I think from that perspective, I think it's worth just pausing for a moment and thinking about those positives.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just make a couple of points and noting Councillor Douglas's public participation at the start of the meeting, really laying out the main points from Labour's side as our spokesperson for the economy. I think, I'll place on record a little frustration again about not having a voice at the table of Make It York and on that board as an opposition. And with view on the next contracting arrangements, we're really interested in the next makeup of the service level agreement and how that will be drawn up. With regard to these papers before the executive, I'm worried a little about how Make It York are going to make the money that they project to make as part of this bailout. And I suspect that what will grow is a tension between Make It York making that money and residents, micro and small businesses' views of Make It York. And I think that's something to keep an eye on, of course. I think there are concerns around a fair, balanced approach to what Make It York promotes, who it promotes, and what it doesn't provide support for in throughout the time that it's been in existence. What events happen and those that don't get a hearing, and crucially, what are the target audiences for those events? I think all that is without mentioning the more crucial aspect of the wider York economy and the lack of progress on broadening our economy away from its over-reliance on insecure work, and therefore not aiming towards our economic strategy of increasing wages and bringing in career jobs in the high-skilled sector. And I think that has obviously been overlooked. I'm sure there must be agreement on that, and that needs to be part of the next phase of Make It York. But I think today marks another significant point, unfortunately, in which more business leaders and trade associations speak out. And I'm aware Councillor Widdowson read out some endorsements, which are very welcome. I absolutely agree, but nonetheless, some voices are having to speak out again about this executive, the council's leadership of managing the city centre, either through Make It York or by not seemingly getting more of a grip on Make It York, if that's what you wanted to do. I think we've lost the Great Yorkshire Fringe at the start of this year. We've seen a long-running dispute with our market traders, who are the lifeblood of the city centre. And large parts of the business community and the hospitality sector have voiced their unhappiness. So I think that trickles down to residents who feel that the city centre is no longer a place that they want to go, or doesn't have things that attract them, or certainly that they've got a feeling of being priced out of their city centre. All that said, as an opposition, we're certainly ready to work with you to get this right. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much. I don't know, I'll go to Charlie and Patrick first, whether there's anything you want to respond to. I don't know whether there's anything relevant in a sense, just to give you an opportunity.
I don't think so, Chair.
And similarly to Sean and Steve.
I don't think anything further to add from me, other than yes, to thank you for the time and for all the constructive input, particularly from Charlie and from Patrick in preparing all this paperwork. As Patrick, it's taken a long time and a lot of effort since the summer.
Thank you very much. Just to reinforce for me, thanks that have already been given. Thank council staff at the start, and obviously extend that to Make It York staff for this period of time. I think it's important to do that. Equally, reflecting on Councillor Ayres' points, we obviously inherited quite a lot of the structure, including the principles of handing over the markets and the city centre to Make It York back in 2014. So very happy to work constructively to look at that service level agreement in February, and looking to make sure that we have the retention of the skills to make sure, whether it's business support, a successful city centre, or support for hospitality, retail and the leisure industry, that we are working together, as those business leaders have said, and pulling in that direction, recognising obviously that there's always room for improvement on those structures that came about from 2014. So we have the recommendation in the report in front of us between pages 59 and 84. Could I please see all those in favour of that recommendation? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of that recommendation that's in front of us. Thank you to Sean, Steve, Charlie and Patrick for joining us. We can now call back to the meeting councillors Smalley and Craghill, who left the meeting during that item, and hopefully with the world of technology, I can see Councillor Smalley back and now Councillor Craghill. Thank you very much. So that then takes us on to agenda item 10. So I'm pleased Councillor Craghill has come back for the Council Housing Energy Retrofit Programme item that is on pages 85 to 106. And I'm handing over, I can see, to Tracy and to Michael. Tracy.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to introduce myself in my interim role as Director of Place, and introduce Michael Jones as the Interim Assistant Director for Housing and Community Safety. And I'm going to just set out the challenges we have in this report, but then Michael's going to take you through the detail. So this report sets out proposals to address the key challenge of making our housing estates, the council housing provision, carbon neutral in response to the council's declared climate emergency. The executive member for housing and safer neighbourhoods has asked for the report to be referred to the housing scrutiny, and that duly happened last Friday, for pre-decision scrutiny to inform the considerations of executive today. So Michael's going to present the report, and then I will provide you with an update of that scrutiny meeting. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Tracy. The council has been investing in measures to improve the energy efficiency of council homes for a number of years. This has included second generation double glazing, new boilers and loft and cavity insulation. However, despite this, around a third of council homes are below an EPCC rating, which is recognised by the government as a minimum standard homes should achieve in the coming years. Further interventions such as internal or external wall insulation and air source heat pumps are needed in order to improve the performance of our harder to treat homes. This energy retrofit programme is important to meet our 2030 carbon neutral aspirations, but just as importantly to help reduce fuel poverty and improve the health and well-being of our residents. The paper before you has three options. Option 1 is to undertake no works in the immediate term whilst a longer term strategy is developed. Option 2 looks to commit the full £2 million budget into retrofit works now. And option 3, which is a recommended approach, is where a hybrid solution is proposed. This option balances the urgency to kickstart the energy retrofit programme with the need to develop long-term and viable solutions. In 2021, we would invest £1 million into retrofitting some of our poorer performing homes, utilising the in-kind support and expertise provided by WICA. Alongside these physical works, we will develop a longer-term strategy to support energy retrofit in our council homes, as well as supporting investment in homeowner and private rented sector housing in the city. This long-term strategy will consider different investment models, recognising that we cannot afford to tackle this challenge alone. The programme will link up with our economic and skills strategies by supporting the supply chain to foster a green economic recovery in York and upskilling our tradespeople. The initial investment would allow us to both learn lessons from the first phase of retrofit and perfectly position ourselves to take advantage of future grant funding opportunities. This approach will continue to build York's reputation as a place which has a bold and innovative approach to tackling the climate emergency and improving the lives of our residents by providing homes which are warm, comfortable and affordable to heat. Thank you. Pass back to Tracy.
Thanks, Michael. So the Scrutiny Committee reviewed the report and had a long and fulsome discussion for a Friday night. They made no formal recommendations to take to executive, but there were a number of comments that I want to convey to you. Firstly, the report was very warmly welcomed across the whole of the Scrutiny Committee, and there was broad support for option 3, which is that hybrid approach with an immediate programme of practical works to deliver immediate improvements, supported by the development of a broader strategy to try and achieve the citywide challenge that has been set. There was particular support for aspects of the proposals to develop the supply chain of businesses able to undertake the retrofit work. It's a developing area of economic activity, and the committee were particularly supportive of providing opportunities for York-based companies and SMEs to get involved in that supply chain for the next phase, and for the development of new green jobs, so apprenticeship opportunities and reskilling opportunities across the building industry. There's a real person-centred approach being discussed and favoured at the committee, with the carbon element of it being supported by the ambition to tackle fuel poverty and improve the living environment in our council housing, to provide better insulated and ventilated housing, to improve people's prisons' health and well-being. In addition, the committee implored officers to explore how the council can protect its investment in council housing in the eventuality of a tenant exercising their right to buy rights after the retrofit works are complete, and requested that that be a further strand of activity that we undertake. So I recommend the report to executive with the proposal to proceed with option 3 and to invest £1 million now, with a further strategy report brought back to executive for a further work programme in future years to pursue the larger zero carbon targets.
Thank you very much to Tracy and Michael for that introduction. Obviously happy to open the agenda item to any questions, and I'll go to Councillor Craghill first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Tracy has reported on the scrutiny discussion of this item, I just wanted to start by saying that I was very heartened by that discussion at the Housing Scrutiny Paper Committee last week, that resulted in support from all parties for the recommended option 3 in this paper. That particular discussion followed another very important meeting and very relevant meeting of the climate change scrutiny earlier in the week, which discussed papers setting out the options and challenges for the city's pathways to zero carbon. And I felt that was also a very inspiring meeting, and it was again encouraging to see all parties equally passionate, in fact, and committed to sustaining the level of our ambition to tackle the climate emergency. I'd also agree with today's press editorial on that subject, that the estimated costs of achieving zero carbon should make no difference to the urgency of the need to take action. No one ever said that any of this would be easy. But York's overall economy is valued at £5 to £6 billion, and there is huge potential that by working together on carbon reduction, such as retrofit works, that city partners can realise very big co-benefits for our health and well-being, new jobs, and also the quality of our homes. The papers were very clear that York's housing stock accounts for around 1/3 of our locally produced carbon emissions, and also that 80% of the housing stock we'll all be living in by 2030 and beyond has already been built. So that puts puts energy efficiency retrofit as a top priority. And we've heard just now, and in the paper sets out the size of that retrofit challenge. And as has just been said, that challenge can't be tackled from the council budgets alone, but will need external funding and other innovative approaches. And this paper represents a first and very important step in getting on and starting to tackle this challenge, making the best and most strategic use of the resources we have. As officers have said, option 3 will enable us to get on and improve the energy efficiency of around 60 or so of our worst performing council homes. This will help to reduce fuel poverty with lower energy bills and warmer, healthier and more comfortable homes. And by using a fabric first approach, it will also improve the fabric of our housing stock in the same way as the rest of our annual refurbishment work improves our assets and reduces future maintenance costs. It will also, however, enable us to develop the necessary skills and expertise for retrofit within the council, and to start developing skills and green jobs in the local construction sector, providing that all-important pipeline of work that contractors need to make it viable to learn new skills. It will enable us to develop models for future delivery in our wider council housing stock. And very importantly, it will enable us to get a track record and position ourselves to access further grant funding. All of this will, of course, I think it's very important to say this, will have to be done in conjunction with our tenants, who, along with other residents in the city, will have to be at the centre of any successful approach to housing retrofit. And as the paper says, the next stage of the project will be an extensive engagement exercise with our tenants. This obviously isn't going to be imposed on anyone, but we certainly hope that many tenants will be inspired to both improve the comfort of their homes and to be part of the solution to tackling climate change. And by using the further 1 million carefully, we'll be able to support the development of the strategy and retain capacity for match funding when opportunities arise, with the prospect of improving the energy efficiency of many more council homes in the longer term. So just to finish, I very much welcome the further points from the committee from the scrutiny committee that Tracy has already set out. And I would like to thank officers for all the work that's been done to bring this paper together. This is the beginning of a long road to a zero carbon housing stock. There's a great deal of further work to do, but I'm very pleased that this council is amongst those nationally that are taking a lead on this.
Thank you very much for that comment and recommendation to accept the recommendations in the report. I can't see any other hands indicating for questions or comments, so we'll take that as a recommendation from Councillor Craghill that we've got set out between pages 85 and 106 with the support as mentioned from the scrutiny committee. Could I please see those in favour of accepting those recommendations? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting those for agenda item 10, and thank you to Tracy and Michael. That then takes us on to agenda item 11, which is the amendment to the council tax support scheme. I'm just looking, the paper says that Ian will introduce this report, but I can see that David has come into the room, so I will hand over to Ian and David.
I think, Chair, it's going to be Pauline and David are going to do.
Oh, I apologise. So I'll hand over to Pauline first.
Thank you, Chair. This report, it may seem like a minor, small administrative change, but it will make a big difference to our residents in York. It presents Executive with a recommendation to amend the Council's council tax support scheme. This follows consultation on implementing a £2.50 de minimis limit in respect of a change in financial income before customers in receipt of council tax support are issued with a revised bill. So these are our residents that get help with paying their bills. A bit, reflects previous benefits that were in place and is important, particularly at this current time during the pandemic. The core of the issue is that the universal credit scheme causes fluctuations around any variation in residents' income, no matter how minor, which in turn results in constant recalculation of a resident's council tax account. And with each change, we have to generate a new bill. Putting this into perspective, this year has seen an average of 1,500 changes per month, which is around 20,000 changes a year, and the majority of those are below £2.50. The majority of residents claiming council tax support have some income, and the constant changes in their bills causes problems and confusion. And executive members on the Financial Inclusion Steering Group will recall that actually it was our partners, the Welfare Benefits Unit and Citizens Advice York, that brought this to our attention and said that they were getting referrals through where this was causing residents difficulty in trying to determine what their weekly and monthly income was to be, and the difficulty that brought them in terms of budgeting. To further complicate the issue, often no recovery action can be started due to the constant changes in liability, which can and does exacerbate debt issues. And until we start recovery, sometimes we don't understand the level of debt a resident can be in. The changes are generally very small, just a couple of pence. However, under our current scheme and the council tax bills, new bills must be issued in every single case. This has created significant workloads for our staff when we should be focusing on supporting those in particular hardship and suffering significant impacts being felt by our communities due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Turning to the process of changing the council tax support scheme, the council must by law undertake appropriate consultation if it wishes to amend the scheme. And any such change must be approved by full council by the 11th of March in the financial year preceding the change. As such, we've undertaken a 6-week period of consultation with our stakeholders and residents, and this was undertaken for 6 weeks over October and November, and was promoted very, very widely, and as well as residents, our partners and other CVS organisations across the city responded to the consultation. The consultation was available online and questionnaire is set out at Annex A, and the detailed response to the consultation is set out at Annex B. The headline feedback, without going into all of the detail, is that stakeholders overwhelmingly support a change that implements a de minimis limit of £2.50. And I think you can see from the results, over 3/4 of respondents supported the change, and only a small percentage disagreed with the change of 10%. The only concerns raised were the impact on those who would be negatively affected by changes in their income within the tolerance, resulting in a lower council tax award over a long period of time. And you can see in the report and in the annex that an example is given there that someone could be over a full year significantly affected. And I can assure members that support will be made available through the scheme that we have, a discretionary council tax scheme to support them, and they will be signposted and supported so that they will not suffer financially. Executive have two options associated with this decision: either maintain the scheme as it is and continue to issue revised bills in every single case, or in line with the consultation feedback, implement the de minimis limit of £2.50. Executive are asked, therefore, to make a recommendation to full council, as outlined in paragraph 2, to support the change to implement the de minimis limit of £2.50. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. And I can see that, as mentioned, David is here in case of any questions. I'll first go to Councillor Eyre, and obviously happy to open it for questions after that.
Thank you, Chair. Given the time of the evening, I won't start going into detail about all the issues with universal credit and some of the problems that our residents are facing as a result of that, but this is probably one of the more unintended consequences of universal credit, and something that for once we're actually in a position to do something about. I think, as Pauline said, this relatively minor issue can lead to up to 20,000 new bills being sent out each year, which is something along the lines of ridiculous. And it's, as Pauline said, this has come from our work with the Financial Inclusion Steering Group, Citizens' Advice and Welfare Benefits, who brought this to our attention. And we'll be able to do something, I believe, about this as we take it to full council. In an ideal world, we probably would have wrapped this up as part of the wider consultation around the council tax support scheme, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we've not been able to do that. So it's about pressing on with this minor amendment as quickly as we possibly can. It has been out to 6-week consultation, and as was alluded to by Pauline, there was one potential issue that may have been raised up where people could find themselves up to £130, which is a paragraph 5 shortfall. So we have looked at that as much as we possibly can, and paragraph 16 does go into detail about how we will make sure that if that consequence were to arise, we would make sure we mitigate it in ways that make sure people aren't financially disadvantaged. So I think with that, Chair, happy to support the recommendations on page 107, paragraph 2.
Thank you very much for that. I can't see any other hands coming up. So if we take that recommendation from Councillor Eyre, could I see all those in favour of accepting them? Thank you very much. That's a clear majority in favour of accepting the recommendation on agenda item 11. And thank you to Pauline and David. We now move on to agenda item 12, which is urgent business. No agenda items. Just finally to repeat really some of that discussion that we had under agenda item 7 as the last meeting of the executive in 2020. That thank you to all of the city's key workers and of course council staff. This has not been the year, whether you're a council leader, a councillor, a council worker or a key worker, that any of us would have imagined or expected. But once again, I've been continually impressed by the resilience and the way that many organisations, people, neighbours, families have come together in York. And of course, since before the pandemic, the flooding that we had in York, which has to be acknowledged as well. And in that sense, wish everybody a happy Christmas and let's hope for a much happier new year as we get into 2021. Thank you and goodbye.
I can confirm the live streams now.